Yesterday there was a fairly landmark development. The monetary policy agreement between the government and the Reserve Bank was made public. The agreement itself was signed on the 20th of February. What's important about this is it formally makes India an inflation targeting country or an inflation targeting central bank. It joins a select band of countries like the United Kingdom, in a flexible way United States as well, though United States has other targets. The other countries like New Zealand, Australia, a whole bunch of developed countries have asked their central banks to formally target inflation. It doesn't mean that they don't look at other. It's the primacy of price setting or inflation as the target for the central bank that sets apart this act. Sets apart this action. The Reserve Bank has to publish, they have to agree to a target, and at the moment the government of India has given them a target of 6% for FY 15-16 and 4% in all years thereafter, plus or minus 2%. The Reserve Bank will have to publish the operating targets and the procedures through which it will achieve them. Once every 6 months, it will have to publish a document explaining the sources of inflation and the forecast for inflation for the next 18 months. And the agreement makes it very clear it is flexible inflation targeting. So you're not tied very tightly. If the targets are not reached continuously for 3 quarters, then the Reserve Bank will have to file a report with the government explaining the reasons for the failure and the remedial actions it will take. This is the strategy. This is the act put in, and now the RBI Act will be amended, and the next step will be to also select a monetary policy committee. Dr. Rangarajan, former chairman of the PMEAC, and more importantly, former Reserve Bank governor, and someone who was known as an inflation warrior in his time, joins in, as does Jahangir Aziz, the Asia Economic Research Head at JPMorgan. Good morning to both of you. Dr. Rangarajan, you had even informally made inflation targeting your goal when you were RBI governor. Do you think formally putting it in is a good idea?
I think so. I think these things have to be formalized at one time or the other. Since there has been some confusion in the minds of people as to the direction in which the RBI should be moving, this agreement, in my view, puts the matter in the right perspective. The dominant objective of monetary policy is to maintain price stability, and towards that goal it should work. But let me also say that it does not mean that other objectives are irrelevant. Basically, in my view, inflation targeting essentially means that when inflation goes beyond the comfort zone, the primary objective of the central bank should be to bring it down. Below that particular level, it can look at other objectives. But beyond the comfort zone, the Reserve Bank must use all the instruments available to it to bring it down.
Okay. Let me get Jahangir in at this juncture. Jahangir, one source, or at least one important source of inflation would be fiscal deficit. If that goes haywire, it becomes difficult for the Reserve Bank to meet its inflation targets. Now, is it necessary, therefore, that inflation targeting agreements have to be dovetailed with fiscal deficit targets as well? And if they are reneged upon, the Reserve Bank per se will be forced to renege on its targets. How does it work in other countries?
So you're right. I mean, if you look at, let's say, Reserve Bank of New Zealand or Reserve Bank of Australia, you will find that the actual contract includes a large number of conditionalities. In our case, there are no conditionalities, and I think over time we will develop those conditionalities. In our case, it only says that, look, if the target is missed for 3 consecutive quarters on either side, that's the time when the RBI will have to come and explain it to the government as to why it has missed. And my sense is that if fiscal deficit or a profligate fiscal policy by the government is the one that's causing it, RBI essentially is off the hook, and quote-unquote the remedial measure would fall on the hands of the government. But if you look at other countries, the question that you asked, I think there are very specific caveats and very specific conditionalities, including things like fiscal deficit, what is the price of commodities, oil prices, things that are beyond the control of the central bank. Those are used as conditionalities, that if those conditions are violated, then the central bank is not at fault. So my guess is that over time we will get to a situation of that kind. But for the time being, clearly, I think that if fiscal deficit is the cause, my sense is that the RBI will make sure that the government knows that fiscal deficit is the cause of inflation being missed, in which case, as I said, the remedial action lies with the with the fiscal authorities. However, in the event that, even if it's fiscal policy that's driving inflation, the idea is that, if fiscal deficit goes up, inflation goes up, the RBI will be forced now to raise rates, which will increase the cost of funding the borrowing costs of the government, and therefore there should be some form of automatic discipline being imposed on the fiscal authorities.
Okay, exactly. Dr. Rangarajan, the same question to you. Does this have to be dovetailed with an FRBM Act, which is as watertight as the RBI agreement itself? Should it have been made a part of it? How does it work in other countries, and what's your own take?
Well, I think the FRBM Act specifies the level of fiscal deficit. The only issue is that what happens if the fiscal deficit target is not adhered to.
No, it is regularly pushed back, sir. It happened even with the previous UPA regime.
I think the Act is somewhat loose on that. It only wants the finance minister to come to the parliament and explain as to why it has failed to meet that target. It is the same thing with respect to the inflation targeting too. I mean, the job of the governor is not at stake, as in the case of New Zealand, if the inflation target is not met. All that is required is to come and explain either to the government or to the parliament the reasons why it's not been able to achieve it. But I do think that the very fact that there is an FRBM Act itself puts some restraint on the government, even though you are right that the target has never been adhered to in the sixth sense of the term, and we keep on postponing the roadmap for fiscal consolidation. But given that fact also, what is really clear is that the Reserve Bank of India, when the inflation goes beyond a particular level, must be willing to take all actions which are required in order to bring the inflation down. Now, the Reserve Bank of India has no alibi at that time to say that we were looking at something else and therefore we are not doing it. I think what this act or what this agreement imposes on the Reserve Bank of India is that you are at liberty and you can use whatever instruments that you have to control inflation once inflation crosses that limit.
Okay. It requires, such an agreement also requires an independent central bank. That's what a lot of observers keep writing about. Is the Indian central bank independent enough? And an allied question. Very soon we will have a monetary policy committee which will be responsible for the same responsibility. How is the independence of the entire committee ensured? How should its selection be?
Well, if you ask me, I would say that this agreement itself enhances the autonomy and the independence of the central bank. This clearly says your dominant objective is price stability, and therefore you have the power and the freedom to take action. Now I think it is not possible for the finance ministry or the finance minister to intervene and say, when the Reserve Bank of India is taking action, no, it is not desirable, and so on and so forth. It is the field is now entirely, the ball is entirely in the court of the Reserve Bank. Now, as far as the technical committee is concerned, I have a different view. I had always thought that a subcommittee of the board of the Reserve Bank could be constituted, as we did for the Board for Financial Supervision. But if they want to set up an independent committee, obviously it has to be seen that it is not dominated by government representatives. There should be representatives of the government, the Reserve Bank, and some independent members, which will guide, not only guide, but will decide the policy actions.
Okay. Jahangir, your take, does this enhance the independence of the central bank per se? And your thoughts on the Monetary Policy Committee, how is it done in the United Kingdom, for instance?
Look, I mean, as Dr. Rangarajan said, I think this contract in itself provides the central bank with a fair degree of independence now. So, if inflation is towards the upper band or creeping towards the upper band, and then let's say the Reserve Bank says that, well, we can't really raise rates or because of X, Y, and Z reason, then it is solely responsible for that action, and vice versa. On the downside, we clearly do not have formal independence. Formal independence would be good. Perhaps when the Central Bank Act is amended as part of the draft, Indian Financial Code, we might see some degree of formal independence of the central bank. The MPC committee is clearly a critical player in all of this. It depends not only on the independence of, or at least the perceived independence, more importantly, of the members, more than the actual independence, but more importantly, what role does the MPC going to have in the decision on monetary policy? Is it simply going to be advisory? It is going to be based on, some sort of voting arrangement? What kind of executive powers will the MPC have? If it is purely advisory, then clearly, how much independence that the members have matters, but doesn't really matter that much. It becomes clearly extremely important if we have some sort of voting mechanism. And clearly the fine print hasn't been decided on that. The draft financial codes does actually have a draft set of principles on which the members will be, the members outside of the government and RBI will be picked. Let's see, how the MPC committee formally, what rules and arrangements are brought into play. Okay,
but elsewhere in the United Kingdom, they get selected as independently as the governor. How is the selection abroad? Say in the US Fed.
The selection of the selection of the member of the MPC committee is taken very seriously. Okay. There's a large degree of firewalls. There is significant amount of independence, and by the way, several members of the BOE's Monetary Policy Committee are actually active members of the financial committee of the community. Okay. So they are, they actually include investment bankers and hedge fund managers.
Oh, right.
So there are extremely tight firewalls established.
All right. Well, there is a lot more to discuss on that, but this is a preliminary discussion from people who know the field well, especially someone who has been there, done that, like Dr. Rangarajan. Jahangir and Dr. Rangarajan, thank you very much for joining us in this first set of discussions on the monetary policy agreement between the central bank and the central government, which has clearly taken the evolution of monetary policy in India to a new level.